And I'm wondering whether...
Not this permanent secretary, sir.
Fair enough, fair enough, fair enough. But I'm wondering whether files would be expected to tell us the content of the file should reveal the decision-making process. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, sir.
Right. So in other words, if we wanted to understand why the department, the Poverty Alleviation Bureau, is that the correct term? Poverty Eradication Fund, why the fund's managers would have decided to sponsor shows, there should be evidence of that to be found in the relevant files.
There should be, sir, yes.
And equally, it would be expected similarly that we should be able to find explanations behind the funding of a marriage seminar, for example.
Well, I can't speak to the explanations,
But you might find it in a file.
yes, sir.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, I think that it would do us well if we could perhaps hear from the Auditor General on these two matters. I wouldn't ask for it to happen right now, but I could come back to that. The other area of vigilance that I'm a little bit concerned about, Mrs. Springer, is the part where the Auditor General at 440 speaks about the audit observing that there was no formal system for following up on assistance provided in order to ensure that the reduction in or alleviation of poverty was indeed being realized through these programs. It would seem to me that they are, well, first of all, do you have the report in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Right, okay. So if you look at paragraph 440 at chapter 4, page 60, what do you understand that observation to be saying? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
There is no robust monitoring and evaluation program.
Correct, and I'm with you on that. Now, do you see, what is your view about that? Because that was not necessarily something that you presided over. That's something largely that you would have come and found. What is your view about that situation?
In general, monitoring and evaluation programs, they're not, across government in general, the monitoring and evaluation programs are not generally robust. What I would say about the ministry I'm associated with now is that prior to my joining the ministry, there was a consultancy with the Organization of American States, which did provide a tool where there could be evaluation along these lines for the programs that the then Ministry of Social Care would have been engaged in. The impression that I formed from the files was that there was no great uptake on that process, on that particular tool. The ministry, however...
Could you pause there?
Sure.
Are you satisfied from your reading of the files that senior staff of the Poverty Fund would have had, people involved in the management of the fund would have had access to that, what would you call it, training?
It was a consultancy.
Consultancy, yeah.
My understanding was that all heads of departments across the entire ministry would have been consulted during the work of the organization. Well, the work of the Organization of American States was being conducted, but it has been, since I've been there through meetings and so on, the research department, which worked closely with the OIS in the development of that particular system, they have always lamented that there was little or no uptake on that process. It is a tragedy, but that is what it was. What I would say, though, is that the government, through its collaboration with the Commonwealth Secretariat, is in the process of rolling out a government-wide robust evaluation process, commitment for results. So through that, the whole concept, the whole idea of not having proper evaluations and so on of any funds that are spent, any of taxpayers' funds, should be a thing of the past. If the CFR process is amalgamated into the current estimates process, which I think it will be, and there are specific targets, and so on. So the government is working towards dealing with this issue. This particular issue of monitoring and evaluation is not specific to the social protection sector. In general, there are some ministries which are good at it, but in general, it is not something which is heavily practiced across the government.
Would you agree that the absence of a system of monitoring and evaluation is really, at its core, policy weakness?
Yes.
Perhaps a policy failure, or a failure of policy, or failure to have policy?
It's a weakness.
You would leave it as a weakness. And in this particular regard, would you, well, you say it is a weakness. I'm not sure, PS, but I'm going to be guided by you. Are you aware of a policy that existed with respect to this fund, with respect to monitoring and evaluation at all? Was there a policy when you came? Did you find any policy at all?
Not with respect to monitoring and evaluation, since it moved from the Ministry of Finance.
Okay.
So I guess what you're saying, Minister, is that it's an absence of policy.
An absence
Yes.
of policy,
Mhm.
indeed. And when did the fund move from the Ministry of Finance, please?
If I can just check. You know,
Please,
it's
certainly.
specific. It was either 2000 in October 2008,
In October 2008.
yes.
Okay. Yes, that's what I thought I recalled.
Mhm.
And so therefore, between October 2008 and when you would have come in 2018, there's really no evidence of a policy to deal with the matter of evaluating and monitoring the assistance provided under the Alleviation of Poverty Program.
I cannot say definitively that there is absolutely no evidence because I have not reviewed every single file,
Okay. But you have not seen any?
not with respect to monitoring and evaluation.
Fine. And who should be charged with the responsibility of creating such a policy in ordinary circumstances, Permanent Secretary?
Policies are normally the remit of the minister. Recommendations, they can be bottom up, where recommendations may come from technical persons, administrative persons, and the minister may agree or not agree,
But
or
in-
they can be top down,
But
where
in
the
the end,
minister can say, this is
correct.
what is to be.
So that in the end, the minister is responsible for signing off on such a policy. In order to ensure that there is a policy in place, the minister's imprimatur must be given.
In our system of governance, yes.
Correct. Okay, thank you. And at some point, Mr. Chairman, we may wish to reflect on whether there is a need, in the absence of evidence up to this point, of there being a system for monitoring and evaluation of the money, the public funds which is being distributed. We may need to decide whether we wish to have a consultation with the relevant ministers who held responsibility for poverty alleviation in Barbados between 2007 and 2018.
That,
I-
go ahead, sorry.
Sorry?
Go ahead, sorry.
I want to turn very, very quickly, sir, to paragraph 448 with regard to the construction repair of houses supervised by the ministry. And as I look at this paragraph, I am a little bit startled because I understand the paragraph to be directing us to the fact that there was a period of time when the UDC and the RDC constructed and repaired houses on behalf of the fund, but then after that, there was a shift away from that. Is that your understanding of this paragraph, Permanent Secretary?
Yes, sir.
And that shift would have gone to who, please? That responsibility would have been shifted to who?
Based on the evidence that I saw,
Yes.
there was a consultant who was engaged to oversee a housing repair and rebuild or build project, and there would have been at least one contractor who would have been engaged to carry out that work.
Now, let's stop there. This consultant would have been brought, well, this consultant would have been contracted by whom?
Well, the payments were made by the Ministry of Social Care at that time. So it would suggest that the person, the consultant, would have been engaged by that ministry.
Okay. Do we have any evidence of there being, of this consultancy having gone out to tender?
I cannot say. As I said, I haven't reviewed every single file. It was not under my jurisdiction. But if you want me to check, I can check. But
I
the
would.
permanent secretary who was in the chair at that time might be more familiar with that matter.
And you said also that there was, in addition to a consultant, there was a contractor?
Yes, there was a consultant who appeared to, based on what I saw, oversee the program. And there was a contractor, I guess, who actually engaged workmen to build or do the repairs to houses.
One contractor?
I remember one, but that does not mean that there could not be others. I would have to do the further research.
Mr. Chairman, is the Auditor General on this call, or a representative of his office?
He was online. Mr. Trotman, are you still there?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm here.
Mr. Trotman, good afternoon, sir. Would you be able to assist us, please? Is it to your knowledge as to whether there was either the consultant or the contractor which would have been retained by the ministry for the purposes that we are looking at with Mrs. Springer at the moment, did either of those services go out to tender? Please.
No, to the best of my knowledge, I didn't go out to that, but I have my assistant here with me and she could testify. Ms. Yeoman.
Good afternoon, my name is Cassandra Newell, representing the Auditor General's office. We didn't see any documentation as it relates to tenders for any of the contractors that were hired by the consultants.
And Mr. Auditor General, would you, in ordinary circumstances, expect that a consultancy of this nature and/or contractual work of this nature would go out to tender?
Well, it will go to tender if the amount of money involved exceeded the threshold. I think it was 200,000. But in spite of that, you would expect that there would be, if these go to tender, that you would have a certain amount of people, quotations from, qualified interested parties, so that you can evaluate and make sure that you're at least getting a reasonable price.
And have you seen that with respect to this consultancy and with respect to the contractor's work?
Not in this case.
Right. So we have a dearth of both tendering process and also the quotations being sought.
Exactly.
Pardon? Didn't hear you.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay.
I agree.
Fine. And then further to the absence of tendering and seeking quotations on these services, there's also an issue which arises at 4.50, Permanent Secretary. And at 4.50, the Auditor General points us to the fact that there would have been a number of contractors, perhaps about 4, who between the 1st of April 2012 and the 31st of March 2019 would have been paid amounts totaling $2.16 million. But there are no written contracts, according to the Auditor General's report, to support the disbursements above $50,000 made to these contractors. Is that an accurate reflection of your understanding of the circumstances, Permanent Secretary?
This was not, none of these contractors were engaged since June 2018.
I have no doubt that that is true. A completely different ethos existed after that point. But are you saying then that you do not know, you have not had sight of the relevant files that related to these matters?
I don't recall seeing them.
Okay. So therefore, Mr. Trotman, I have to come back to you again to get clarity. Is this report suggesting that there would have been no, for either of the 4 contractors that you refer to, that there is no written contract in existence?
There were none made available to us.
Do you have at your fingertips the names of the contracting entities, please?
I can get that information to you.
I'd be obliged if you did so.
Okay.
And while you are at it, are you in a position also to provide us with the name of the consultant whose project management services were contracted, but for which you do not have any evidence of a tendering process or securing quotations?
That would have been Kenneth Knight. He was the project consultant.
That would be who? Sorry?
Kenneth Knight.
Kenneth Knight.
Hmm.
And the contractor that we refer to in the same context, I think the PS's explanation was that the consultant would have provided the project management services and then the contractor oversaw the work.
No, the contractors, I guess, would have employed workmen
Okay.
to do the actual work.
Do you have the name of the contractor in question? Auditor General?
You mean the 4 contractors that we're talking about at paragraph?
Well, I actually confess that I was wondering about that because you spoke about 4 contractors at paragraph 4.5, but PS was telling us about the consultant and then a contractor. So I wasn't clear. I wasn't clear as to how it unfolded.
I said I remembered one,
Oh, you remember one
One.
contractor? Okay.
yes.
Well,
it's
in that
Blue
case
Star
then,
that I remembered.
In that case, then, you have already committed to assisting us with the names of the contracting entities, so we don't have to trouble you further on that, Auditor General. I believe that the Leader of the Opposition has spoken to the consultancy fees as well. Had you, Honorable Leader, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, I am.
Right. So, therefore, I would not revisit that matter. Thank you very much, Permanent Secretary. Thank you very much, Auditor General.
Thank you, Minister.
you,
Just to follow up on Minister Simmons's line of questioning with respect to 4.50, you have the report there.
Yes, sir.
The statement of that paragraph does in fact cover this, shows us that the period covered goes up to March 2019, beyond 2018. Your testimony is that you are not aware of these matters because they're subject of query prior to your coming in June of 2018. This references up to 31st of March 2019.
I don't recall dealing with any of these monies,
All right. All right.
and no contracts were certainly awarded during
During the period. Okay.
So this would have had to have been work that would have started before or something.
Okay. Now, you read from us at the initial part of your testimony here you read from a statement, a prepared statement. We would want for the marshal to have that copied, if you don't mind.
it needs tidying up because it's also part of it is handwritten. You can have what is here, but I would prefer,
Well, we
That
would
happened.
take what is here, you could tidy it up and send that
Okay.
after as well.
okay, that's fine.
Thank you. The members can have the benefit of that. You've also promised us, you've also promised us some of the notes that came to you, memos that came to you, that sort of triggered your concern when you went to the ministry in 2018. And you probably don't have all of those with you now, but we would appreciate having them as soon as it's practicable for you.
I have 3 here.
I will take what you have here.
These are copies, so you can have these.
Yeah. And if there are further documents, we would appreciate having them at a later stage as well, if you don't mind. You know, would you, I think I asked this, sir, I don't recall your answer, would you know who preceded you as permanent secretary to this?
The office of the head of the public service will be able to give that, and would be able to give that information definitively.
You don't
But-
know?
The officer was Mrs. Janet Phillips,
Janet Phillips?
but as I said, the office of the head of the public service would be able to give you a full list of permanent secretaries
We hear you on that.
who would have been assigned to the ministry over the period.
But as far as you know, Ms. Janet Phillips, Janet Phillips immediately preceded you.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Any further question, Minister Husband?
Just one quick question to finish off what I'd started. What is the structure in place now when field investigator goes out all the way up to approvals? Just so when we get information. No, I mean now.
No?
In other words, when you came on board, your thing was to put wrong things right. And therefore, I would assume that you are still doing field investigations
No.
and helping people? No, no?
Well, because of the ad hoc nature of the requests,
Okay.
I made the recommendation to the minister who agreed that we should suspend the operations of the Poverty Eradication Fund until we were in receipt of the Auditor General's
Report.
completed report.
Oh, so your current field investigator,
The person who was field investigator, now works with our hotline.
hotline, okay, gotcha.
And the hotline provides guidance to vulnerable persons.
Thank you. Do we have any other colleagues on the line that might want to raise a question, make a comment? I see no one asking for the floor. It looks like that's it, Ms. Springer. I want to thank you very much for coming and giving us of your time and contributing some useful testimony before the committee today.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thank you, ministers.
Yeah, we will, colleagues, break just for a couple of minutes so we can have the place sanitized before Ms. Haynes, is it?
Yes.
Ms. Haynes comes. Yeah. All right, we got Miss Diana Haynes coming next. She's the former coordinator of Poverty Eradication Program. May have been there somewhat longer than Ms. Springer. Probably could answer some of these questions, or at least point us to persons who can answer some of the questions raised here today and last week. So we're going to get you to bring Ms. Haynes. And while she is coming, colleagues, I think that we're going to have to get the former permanent secretary prior to 2018 to come to talk to us as well.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ms. Haynes. Trust you're well. Thank you for coming.
You're welcome, sir.
Sorry for the time you spent in waiting while we talked to Ms. Springer. And the members of the committee with you today are Minister Simmons on my right, Minister Husbands on my left, and Minister Colin Jordan, who will be back in the room in a minute. We have some of the members of the committee online, as well as representatives from the Office of the Auditor General. Online, we have Senator Drakes, Senator Moe, Senator Nurse, and Dr. Sonia Brown of the Parliament, House Assembly, and Mr. Trotman and Ms. Cassandra Hayward from the Office of the Auditor General. We have to have you take an oath or affirm that what you say to us will be representative of accuracy as far as you know.
Good afternoon, Ms. Haynes. Could you stand, please? Raise the Bible in your right hand and read the oath of witness before you.
The evidence that I shall give before the committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Haynes. As we begin formally, could you just state your name for the record, the position you now hold with the Poverty Eradication Fund, and how long you've been serving in that position, etc.
Okay. Sir, I am Diana Janet Haynes. I am a retired trained social worker, and I was attached to the Poverty Alleviation Bureau, first of all, on a short assignment from December the 8th, 2003 to the 5th of March, 2004. Then on the 25th of May, 2004 to November 2010, when the Bureau was officially disbanded. Following that, I was assigned to the Poverty Alleviation and Reduction Program as coordinator, and that was around mid-October 2015. Around that time is when I retired. But what I would like also to draw to your attention, sir, is that during the periods I was attached to the Poverty Alleviation and Reduction Program, I also served on 2 different occasions in another capacity in agencies at the ministry, and therefore I was away for approximately 18 months. The first period was from December 14, 2009 to January 15, 2010, and then for 10 months from September 1st, 2011 to June 30th, 2012. The last period was December 1st, 2014 to June 2015. So I was away for approximately, like sometime between 2011 to 2015.
All right, so you served with the Bureau from 2004 to 2010. That's correct?
Yeah, 2004, yeah, to November 2010. And that is when the Bureau was officially disbanded.
And you went to the,
And we went over to the Ministry of Social Care in the capacity of coordinator for the Poverty Alleviation and Reduction Program.
and that was from when?
That was from like November, like around November 2010 to October 2015.
All right.
During the period 2008-2009, the Poverty Alleviation Bureau was in transition.
You retired in 2015?
Yes, sir. But I was out for approximately 10 months between the 1st of September 2011 and June 30th, 2012.
You've seen a copy of the Auditor General's report on the operations of the Poverty Eradication Fund?
I did. I read the section pertaining to the Poverty Eradication Fund, sir.
All right, members may have some questions for you, and I'll come back myself. Anybody wants to go first with Ms. Haynes?
Good afternoon, Ms. Haynes.
Hi, good afternoon.
Can I just, because I know you said it twice, but I was just trying to relate it to the periods of time that are identified in the Auditor General's report. What are the periods again during which you were away from the
Poverty Alleviation
Poverty
Reduction
Alleviation?
Program.
Yes.
December 14th, 2009 to January 15, 2010. That was a period of approximately 1 month.
Right.
Then again, from September 1st, 2011 to June 30th, 2012, approximately 10 months.
Okay.
Then again, December 1st, 2004 to June 2015, a period of 7 months.
December 4th.
2015, December 1st, 2015, around that time.
2015.
It could be November, December.
Right.
Right, and
Okay.
then June, until June
The June
to
of
15.
2015.
Yeah. I went back then in around July.
Okay.
Mhm.
And just so I can get an understanding of from you, what is it that your job entailed?
As the project coordinator,
Yes.
as the project coordinator, first of all, I had the opportunity to supervise. This year would be back in, I'm going to look at it from the point of the reference period, 2007. At that time, I had the responsibility of supervising a staff of about approximately 9 persons.
Right.
Included in that staff were, we had 5 field investigators. So that I basically would supervise, I would supervise them. At that time too, we also had a program officer, so the supervision of staff really was dealt between, myself and the project and the program officer. Generally, I had the usual management of the department, the unit really, management of the unit, and also really to make sure that in terms of what we were expected to do, that we really, carry out our responsibilities.
Okay.
Also, in that capacity, I would be responsible for reports, any reports which were required. At that time too, I would have engaged in, dealing with the groups, any group submissions, I too would have oversee those. But generally, it was for the management of the Poverty Alleviation Bureau, as well as the park section. However, I must mention that in 2010, after the Bureau was disbanded, we scaled down. It was only 2 of us then. It was just myself and the field investigator. So actually the functions continued, but then more was expected of me in terms of engaging too. I would also do like some of the assessments, and at that time we had we were really engaged in a national program, the IC Bridge program, and I too had, you know, responsibility for that.
Okay. Now, I wanted to just, I was asking you those things because I wanted to be very fair to you. And I wanted to be sure that you would have been around around 2013 in January.
Okay.
Yeah. You've given us some periods when you were off. September 2011 to June 2012, and then again in December 2015. So I'm presuming that you would have been there in January of 2013. And the reason why I asked that is because the Auditor General is telling us that before January 2013, houses were constructed or repaired by the UDC or RDC, Rural Development or Urban, on behalf of the fund. But that subsequently, the ministry undertook responsibility for constructing and repairing houses. You're familiar with that?
Yes, sir.
And that ministry would be the Ministry of Housing, I presume?
No, it was the Ministry of Social Care.
Ministry of Social Care.
Constituency Empowerment.
Right.
And,
Okay. And the Ministry of Social Care would have taken on this responsibility. And that there were some concerns. Now, are you familiar with the concerns? If you look at the Auditor General's report, you will see at page 63, paragraph 4.48, that they point to two challenges. The first being the receipt of estimates, and the second affecting the repairs and construction in a timely manner. Now, you are the project coordinator. So help me understand a little bit. What would the concern be about receiving estimates from UDC and RDC?
Sir, from the time I went to the Poverty Alleviation Bureau, that seemed to be like, there was a kind of a chronic problem. The thing is that we would make a request to both UDC and RDC for estimates for a number of requests. They would, let me just go back a bit. When the field investigate, when a client comes to the bureau, you know, they come like with their like requests. In some cases, you know, they might ask for house repairs or whatever, but then we refer the matter to UDC and RDC, who would actually go and do the assessment. Then they would get back to us because we would need the assessments to take it to the Poverty Eradication Committee for approval. Sometimes these estimates were not returned like in a timely manner, and therefore it would, in some cases, like hold us back, right? So that was a problem. And then too, when approval was granted and the monies were paid, in some cases, the houses were not, the repairs were not effective too in a timely manner. So that too was another challenge.
Sorry, I lost you. The repairs were not reflecting.
Effective, like in a timely manner.
Okay.
So those were, yes, there were issues there. And as I said, you know, like from the beginning, you know, like when I first was assigned to the Bureau.
Sorry, go ahead. You're
Yeah.
finished?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I thought that the Leader of the Opposition was asking something further from you. Sorry, the chairman was asking something further from you. Okay, so having established that, the question then arises as to your satisfaction with regard to the estimates being able to be obtained. Now, you are the project coordinator. You have 5 field investigators working with you, is that correct?
No, that was up until 2009. There's only one, at the time, when we went over in 2010, there was only one field investigator. But I must also add, sir, that like when we too had a relationship with the technical officer, and therefore, like, you know, we would call, sometimes when we called, then they were saying them up, you know, we would just like plead with them, like to get them over like to us, so that we could get them to the committee on time. So we had to, you know, like put a little fire under them to really get them on time so that we can move ahead.
Okay, I understand that. But what I'm trying to work out is, can you help us a little bit with regard to why a situation would arise where we are told in as many as 8 cases, can you believe that money would have been paid over to rural or urban, and then there's no evidence of construction being done? Are you familiar with those types of circumstances?
I recall before we went over to PARC, we would have...
Over to where?
To the Poverty Alleviation Reduction Program.
Okay, right. Okay.
And this would have been before, like even the 2007. We had, that was a concern too coming from the Poverty Eradication Committee, and therefore we were requested to check on like what was happening. I can recall the field investigators, you know, engaging, reviewing all the requests which were sent to the rural and air from around 2000. And there were a number of, we came up with a number of houses which were not done. In some cases, people had died, that kind of situation. And therefore, we would have compiled the information and pass it on, you know, to the ministry.
Now, when you say you identified a number of houses that had not been done, let's get a little clarity there. Approximately when would that have been that you would have identified this number of houses?
When we started that in about, as I say, between 2007, I think, 2007, 2008. But we went right back. We look at our records, and we went right back to 2000, even when it wasn't there. And we were trying to work out what was happening between 2000 and up to that point in time. Because we also wanted to sort out things, saying that the Bureau was being disbanded, we wanted to, you know, like bring things up to date, so we would have, you know, like research that.
But did your field, what do you call them? Field investigators. Is it not part of their job to be out there observing, okay, you know that a contract has been issued for Mr. Atherley, for Reverend Atherley's house to be built. Are your investigators not supposed to be following up on the status of that work contract?
Not really, because what happened, like we were told in the first thing that the ministry cannot own houses. And therefore we did not have that kind of technical, that expertise to do it. So we relied heavily on urban and rural. The other thing, urban too, the Rural Development Commission had its own social worker. So what existed is when the funds were referred to urban and rural, like they then took control. They would go out and they would, you know, like do follow-up, you know, and do the technical work. So it wasn't a practice that the field investigators will like go out and check. You understand? I know for sure that the social worker at rural will follow up. What would happen is if now, like the client would call and like let us know that some person came or some person didn't come, you know, what was happening, and based on what they were saying to us, we then would follow up with urban or rural to find out exactly what was happening. But to be quite honest with you, there was no like relationship then, like after, you know, we pass on like the money, because they say that we cannot own houses, and it was really like their responsibility from there.
Okay. Now, did you have any relationship with the contractors. When I say relationship, did you have oversight responsibility of the actual contractors who would have been hired to do work for the fund?
Absolutely not.
No?
Because that was urban and rural responsibility, so we didn't know like who was doing what.
All right. Okay, thank you very much,
You're
ma'am.
most welcome.
All right.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Ms. Haynes.
Good afternoon.
You just shared with Minister Simmons that you are the coordinator for the field investigators. Was. Okay, it was. And that your job was to help manage the work of the field investigators.
Supervise, yeah.
The report outlined what were the duties, what it was, the criteria that the investigators would look for, the information they would look for in order to make recommendations. So could you share with us the process of how you would know, for example, who needed help, how the field investigators worked through it, what happened to their suggestions and recommendations, where it was passed to, and what was the whole process all the way up to the person receiving help or not receiving help if it was not approved?
Okay, let me start from the beginning. An individual would approach the bureau. They can walk in or they can be referred, right? At that point, when we had the 5 investigators, we actually had persons responsible for different areas, right? So I'm trying to, but that didn't exist then when we went over to the poverty alleviation program. It was one person, but still it wouldn't change like the whole mechanics of the thing. When someone visited the bureau, assessment would be completed. We have a form where the data was collected, but following that, we had to, the field investigator would have to go and pay a visit to the client's house to observe like living conditions, right? When they returned, they then would compile their, the assessment. The assessment would also contain like an analysis of the situation. What happened, we look at requests in a more or less a kind of holistic way. So we look at the number of the persons in the household, and therefore they should be able to give an account of what is happening to each member in that household, right? And you, as noted here, there are different aspects. We look at the health, you know, like things like that. Now, when they have completed their assessment, we would meet, because at that time, we used to have monthly meetings with the Poverty Eradication Committee. So before the meeting was called, we would meet before we would go through the assessment, okay? If, in looking through the assessment, there might be areas where there's not sufficient information, because it was a situation where, in submitting the information to the committee, we had to be quite clear, because they're not the ones on the ground, they're not seeing. So what we present to them should be clear so that when we get there won't be any questions asked. So it was a question, though, of paying detail to what was submitted. Having done that, you answer, in some cases now, the household, the field investigator would make a recommendation. If, in my view, when I review what was written and like the recommendation arrived at still was not in keeping with what I see from the analysis I'm coming forward, then we would discuss it, you understand, and in some cases they might ask to go back and like revisit the situation. There were also situations where, in my view, the field investigator might, for example, if a household like required for, say like water rates. And the amount was like, say like $1,000 or, say $500 or so, right? In looking at that, it might be a question where the field investigator might recommend like the full amount. But if now in reviewing it, like there are still like some working people in there who can contribute, you know, I might suggest to them, well, no, just have a relook. There are persons here, because part of our work too is based on co-responsibility. It's not just like to give like to them, but where possible, we would try to get them to you know, be involved, take responsibility for that, for what they're doing. So in some cases, then they might have to review. In some cases, you know, when if they're really, you know, like strong in their view, or if it's something that come up that I'm not too sure, I would go with them out to see like what is happening, right? So after they have, after that has been completed, we then would submit the particular case or the cases then to the Poverty Eradication Committee for, we make a recommendation. The Bureau never approve requests. We would make a recommendation and submit it then to the PEC for their, for decision. Following that, if now when we go to the committee, it has been approved or not approved, when we come back, we would, the field investigator would document the particular client file, the information will be placed there, and we then will compile all the information and forward it then to the PS so that it can go to the account section for payment.
Okay, just clarify some things for me. So the field investigator would make a recommendation. You would review it. If you thought there was good cause, you would say, okay, this could go forward. If you needed an adjustment based on contribution or something like that, you would agree on an adjustment, or you go back out into the field and take a look.
Review,
Right. So now the recommendations go up to the committee.
right.
Would you or some other person be assigned to go through the recommendations with the committee?
They go and represent themselves. We would all go, depending on, all the field investigators will go,
Will be
because really,
present?
like, there will be the persons who have intimate knowledge and will be in a better position, because sometimes, you know, the chairman or the other committee members might ask some questions, want some clarification that I won't be able to provide. If it's a situation where someone is absent, you understand, well, I would take on that responsibility. That is why we would try to make sure that there's the detail, and really that is really like sharp in terms of like what they're presenting. So, but they would go and they would represent their case before the committee. But I would also be present.
You would be present.
Because I too would have, you know, if I have done cases too, I would go, but like at that I tend to take like the more, you know, like difficult cases, then based like on my experience, because they were like young in terms of like, you know, experience. So if anything, if a case would come to the department, which might be more challenging, I would take on that responsibility, or the program officer as well, because you supervise them.
So would you say then that by being involved in the committee process, you were able to follow the reasoning why the committee might agree or disagree with a particular recommendation?
Yeah, they would tell us it was discussion, but most of the time, like, they would take our recommendations. You understand? They would take our recommendations, but sometimes they could, well, not approve. It might be a situation where even if we might have recommended X, they might say no, and they might recommend the full thing. We might recommend like the full thing, and they might decide no, like half. So, but you know, they made that determination.
Okay, and the field investigators then would write up the result then of the recommendation, and it would pass to the PS?
No, the PS2 would be on that committee. The PS used to be on the committee.
Okay.
So then we would just go back and compile all the information, the you know, what was approved, the costing, get the documentation, and that would go on then to the accounts to the PS.
Okay. Now, we have here that they'd taken a sample, the Auditor General's office had taken a sample of 316 cases. But of those 316 cases, no assessments were seen for 122 of those. That is, 4.43.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I saw them.
4.43 on page 61.
This one, yeah. You want me to?
Yes,
is it? Oh.
because my understanding is that you had a process. There was a process in place
Yeah.
for field investigation, writing up the information from the field investigation. You would monitor and assess and discuss with the field investigators. You would come to a final agreement of what would go up to the committee. All of you would be in the room where you would present each case and be a part of the discussion. The recommendation may be approved or might be varied in some way, and then that final decision by the committee would then be taken to the PS, who would then see to it that it is action, that this was the process.
Okay.
So there were some 122 cases that were in the system, and there were no assessments done. Let me just ask the Auditor General a question. Can we assume that there were approvals for this or disapprovals,
That's
but
what they
no
want.
assessment accompanying this?
Ms. Trotman?
Mr. Trotman?
Sorry, ma'am, I didn't get that question. I apologize.
Right, at 4.43, you
4.43.
indicated that you took a sample comprising 316 cases,
All right.
and no assessments were seen for 122 of the cases. Can we assume that the 122 cases were approved or disapproved without an assessment?
I would have to look at the analysis, but the information wasn't made available, so I can't say definitively that no approvals were given. But I would have to review the particular spreadsheet to see if we have specific information on each case.
Okay, so these were just cases that were in a file somewhere, and they would just happen not to have an assessment attached to it.
There wasn't an assessment attached.
Okay. Okay, you'll be able to check for us to see if approvals were given for them or not.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you then share with us under what conditions you would have 122 cases, but no assessments would have been done for those clients?
Madam Minister, when I read this on Wednesday, I thought that this was a very strange situation. You understand? And I was a bit concerned. Because one, a number of questions too I would like to raise here concerning this. One, the information presented is like, I don't know which period it covers, and therefore I would like to know the specific period for this, right? I would also like to know if there were blank forms on the file, because I'm saying like each file should have an assessment. So I find it strange that there were no assessment. So I would like to find out if there were blank forms, and also the question that came to my mind is who approved the request for the 122 cases, right? In relation to the other matter with the 6, in that same paragraph, they talk about 36 cases, which
Received assistance,
yeah, but there wasn't any approval.
no signature.
Right, that too is concerning, because as far as I'm aware, approvals were done by the PS only, okay? And it can be done jointly by the PS and the minister. So those are the persons, the PS only can approve. When I look at this, my interpretation is that, you know, it looks as if the minister was, you know, approving or should approve. So I just want to correct that as far as I am aware. And the other thing is that the accounts department required from the bureau, one, we had to show that there was approvals, and secondly, we had to present the documentation. So this particular matter here, you know, is really of some concern, and I really can't speak anymore because it's something that I find hard to believe. So I don't know. I'd be interested to find out when it happened.
Okay. I think the main ones would be the 36, because we see definitively there that approval for assistance was actually given. And those 36 cases, one would want to know who did the field investigations, what would have happened at the committee meeting.
No,
and
not
therefore,
necessarily who did the field investigations, because when I look at this, they say that they saw that the approval for assistance, it was also noted that approval of assistance by either the minister or the PS was not seen for the 36 cases.
Right.
My question is, if these then would have reached the accounts department,
it seems that way.
right?
Because
Who then?
they got
Because if
assistance.
they went to the accounts department, my question is, over the years working with this, if this was done through the Poverty Alleviation Bureau or through the park, we always submitted the documentation, whether it's the bills, because normally like they would pay the supplier or like the supplier for the services. Clients never receive money. So we should have the documentation as well as the approval. Those are two main things that should be passed on to the accounts. And in my view, they shouldn't make any payments unless, process it unless that is done.
Well, the Auditor General will get for us the time period in
Right.
which these particular cases were dealt with, because I too would be very interested to know if those 36 cases
How?
and the 122 cases, if they ever went before committee.
Mhm.
Were you aware of any other parallel process that might have been taking place that would not necessarily come through a field investigator and through the coordinator and make its way up to a committee?
To the committee? No, because once the committee was there, like we were the persons like taking the case.
Okay.
So it shouldn't be, you know, it would come to us. Because even if, for example, the welfare department, like made a refer to us, we would give them, they would use the form that we use, they would send the refers to us, and we would put them then in the booklet. We used to prepare a booklet and send up to them, indicating welfare, so it would come to us. And for every meeting, we have this booklet, and we take it like to the committee.
Who was the permanent secretary during your time?
During my time, there were a number of permanent secretaries.
Okay.
So I don't know which point you want me to begin. In 2007, it was P.S. Welch.
Between 2010,
If I look at the period, the 2007 to 2019.
2010.
You mean 2010?
Yeah, 2010 to 2015.
I can give you the names, but in terms of the period, I am
You'll
not.
have to check.
Yeah,
Okay.
that would need checking.
Okay.
But I could tell you in terms of the sequence who, you know, who were there.
Go ahead.
Oh, so we had P.S. Welch. Then after P.S. Welch, we have P.S. I think Bruce Allen. After him, then we had P.S. Drates, Ernest Drates. And for a short period of time, there were some acting, you know, like appointments there. I remember we had, it was Springer. I can't remember his surname. As well as P.S. Gittings we had there. We also had P.S. Reed. And following them, we had P.S. Phillips. But I didn't really, when she came on, it was the point that I was going off.
You were no longer with the
yeah,
organization?
yeah.
Okay. The, when, if you had to speak a ratio, just in general, because I know it wouldn't be exact, but an estimate, if you think about going into the committee with a whole set of cases, generally what percentage of the cases presented were likely to be approved? Or did it differ a lot?
Normally we would work towards about, per meeting, about 50 cases or a little over. And for the most part, they were approved. In some cases, you might get one or two being deferred, you know, if they think then, well, there were queries, and if in the estimation of the chairman, you know, he think then it need like more information, they were deferred for another time.
Okay,
But
so
basically, like 90% or so would have been approved.
would get approval?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, when those cases are approved, would you then have a situation where y'all would follow up, or not really? Would y'all go back out to see how the client is doing, how the provision was being provided for the
Well, it
individual,
depended on the nature of the request and the service. But remember, it was just like a kind of a one-off. We were supposed to just do one-off payments. So having one-off payments, it wasn't a situation where we have like a built-up like clientele, like persons there that we could truly monitor. Okay, but really from my experience and from there, it was quite clear that those persons who sought assistance, who were assessed, that something else was needed, that we know for sure that they, you know, would come back again. They just couldn't manage. In some cases, their household expenditure was greater than like the income. I mean, a situation where persons might be paying rent and the rent is more than the money that they're earning. So we know that it was a situation where like the stabilization effort was not enough. We needed them like to go further and seek to enable them. And that is why back like in 2006, we would have shared this concern with the PS then, and he was really supportive, and he then tried to bring a program officer on board so that we could actually like engage now with these clients rather than just providing the service and leave them there. We then were in a position then to continue, you know, like to do some training with them. But that was short-lived because come 2008, you know, like, you know, we then weren't sure like what was happening.
Okay, one last question. Were there any issues pertaining to cases and approvals and so on that ever gave you cause for concern? Were there any situations that you observed or heard about that gave you pause?
You, in submitting the cases,
Whether in
But you-
submitting, approving?
not that I know of, because we would submit, and as I told, we would really like try to present, you know, like the information there, so that when the permanent secretary or the chairman like look at it, like there wasn't any doubt in his mind, well
What
look,
the
this here,
problem
yeah,
was.
you understand? But then we also like recognize he had the authority, and therefore, in his view, if he thought or the PS thought that, hey, we know they think otherwise, we just go along with it because they made the final decision.
Okay.
But at seeing that we would have worked with the client, we really had to advocate for them and make sure that we present, you know, like accurate information so that they would get like the assistance.
So you're not aware of a person, for example, presenting to the fund for assistance as field investigators and as coordinator, when you investigated, you felt no, this particular situation does not merit
Yeah, we had
that
some.
kind of help?
Yeah, we had some. of
You
that,
had
yeah.
some,
Yeah.
okay.
mhm.
And did you ever encounter a situation where, subsequent to that, it came to your attention that it was actually granted? You found out that the person received assistance when you and the team did not think it was warranted?
No, because if for that to happen, it certainly wouldn't come to us. It would probably like go on through the back door that we would not be aware of, and we wouldn't be aware of that.
You would not be aware of that?
No. So,
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, you're most
Ms.
welcome.
Haynes, thank you. There's one other member, I think, was asking for the floor. That's Senator Drake, so we won't be keeping you very much longer beyond this point.
Okay.
Senator?
Thank you, Chair. Actually, a lot of the questions that I had listed here, Minister Husbands addressed, and I think there's a little more clarity on those questions. The only other thing I would ask Ms. Haynes is, based on her initial sentiments early up in her testimony, she said that when they would refer the case to the UDC and the RDC, then they would not have necessarily followed up, and the UDC in particular had its own social worker. So is it fair to say then, Ms. Haynes, that there was no coordination as it relates to cases once they were transferred to the RDC and UDC with the fund, and particularly yourself?
Yes, you can say that, because as I said, when we refer, like they became then part of UDC and RDC, like responsibility. Okay, but if, for example, a client like would call and like there were any like concerns, she would tell, we then would follow up with them and let them know, well, like there were certain issues so that they could go and address it.
Okay, and therefore, once the fund has dispersed the monies, then there would be no way for the fund to know if those funds were being misappropriated or allocated in a way that was not intended in the first instance by the fund, by the Poverty Alleviation Fund.
I would not be aware of that.
Okay, so there was no management arrangement then between the Poverty Alleviation Fund and UDC and the RDC as it relates to cases that have been transferred between those three entities?
Can you repeat, please?
So what I'm trying to ask, once you've referred the case, you said that there was no follow-up. So then there's no management coordination between the Poverty Alleviation Fund, the UDC and the RDC once the funds have been dispersed. So the management between those three entities did not at any point come together to have some kind of reporting, reconciliation happening?
Not necessarily the fund, it would have to be the PAB, PARP, and the ministry, and like those agencies. But I can recall, like a meeting having taken place with the RDC and the ministry itself. And in cases, and I'm also aware that the ministry too would have written UDC and RDC, like when there's a problem, they would have done that.
Okay, so there wasn't a structure in place for that type of meeting to occur on a regular basis?
Not that I'm aware of, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms.
You're
Hayes. Back
most
to you, Chair.
welcome.
Thank you, Senator Drakes. I don't see anybody else asking for the floor. I am going to thank you, Ms. Haynes, for your
You're most welcome.
time today and to wish you well.
Thank you very much.
Like you want to stay here some way longer.
Good afternoon. I already have pleasant.
Have a good afternoon.
Evening.
and-
Okay, then, goodbye.
And be safe. And colleagues, before I would entertain a motion for adjournment unless there's some other business, seems to me that we should probably ask the permanent secretary preceding Miss Gabrielle Springer for that period to come. Yeah, we agreed on that?
Mike, call him up.
I was also wondering about the deputy.
You
Because
need,
she
think you
kept
need both of
referring-
them?
Yeah, I don't know, the deputy at the time when she became permanent secretary, when
When Ms.
Springer,
Springer became
right.
permanent, okay.
she said the deputy was the one approving, and some would get to her in an ad hoc manner. And I, in my mind, was wondering, when I asked her, what was the basis, well, she said there was no written basis. We know that she's a person who goes by the book. So it would be interesting to find out, since she wasn't able to get the basis in writing from anybody, which in my mind included her deputy permanent secretary, it'd be good to find out on what basis he made the decisions.
All right, so if we're so disposed, we would have someone sent to the deputy at the time when Ms. Gabrielle Springer arrived in June of 2018, and the permanent